Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and in today's video, we're going to talk about 3D printing with a Bambu P series printer and an AMS offline. All right, so this is probably going to be a bit of a long video talking about why you would do this and all the sort of reasons around and behind it. So in order to keep this video as short as possible for the people that are looking for how to do this, we're going to start by walking through the process of doing this with an SD card transfer from Bambu Labs to the P1S and seeing how that works. And then we'll go over all the other reasons and nuances and sort of problems around doing it this way. All right, so first things first, it is important to note that there are benefits to using a linked device over either LAN or using the Bambu Handy app. There are features that don't work if you're doing the manual method where you're kind of doing the SD card shuffle from the computer to the printer. I'll talk about those afterwards when we get into, again, sort of all the nuances of this. But just keep in mind that there are features that I haven't figured out how to make work unless you have your printer and AMS linked to either the Handy app or to Bambu Labs. All right, so first let's talk about design. There are two main things that we need to understand when we're trying to do a multicolor print. Now, I'm doing this specifically for the P1S printer. The A series and the X series both have more AMS control directly on the display. The P1S doesn't seem to for whatever reason. So you are, again, kind of limited in what you can and can't do in terms of setting it up, feeding, loading, configuring the materials and things like that. So it is a very manual process. But if you're like me and you like to keep your printers and devices offline and not attached to a network, then this is kind of the method to do it. So what I have here is I've got a file that has two bodies in it. One of the bodies has a little bit of a step in it. And the reason for this is I'm going to talk about the ways in which we can configure the color, the different materials. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to right click and save as mesh and send it directly to Bambu Studio. So when it opens Bambu Studio, it's not automatically going to connect to my printer. I do have the ability to hook it up to the local area network. I'll talk about that later in the video. But right now, if we go to the device tab, you'll see there's no printer connected. There's no AMS listed here. So we're doing this completely offline. The first thing that we need to do is understand how we can color these materials. And it can either be based on faces or triangles, essentially, or by object. So because these were two individual bodies, while it's still selected, I'm going to click the split to objects. Now I've got two individual objects, the piece on the inside, the piece on the outside. I want to set my process to be by object. So this allows me to change the filament of an entire object completely. So if you want one of them to be a red material and one to be a white material, you can do it this way by changing it per object. The other way is to do it by painting areas that you want to be a different color. Now, this can get kind of messy because you can run into an area where you're constantly changing materials and purging, and I would just kind of warn you or caution you on that. We're going to go over it though. But the first thing we need to do, because there's no AMS that is linked or paired to Bambu Labs right now, we can't synchronize a filament list, which means it doesn't know what it has available. So we're going to hit the plus icon to add a second filament. Now in this case, the second filament I have available is white. We can add more materials. So let's say that there is spots in all four of the available spaces. We've got a PLA basic. Then you would just want to configure them to those colors. Let's say that we've got a black material in spot 3 and blue in spot 4. Now, currently I've only got two. I've got green in spot 1 and white in spot 2. So these two are empty. As long as I don't use them, that's not a problem. Or as long as I don't try to configure those colors, it's not a problem. If I do, that'll throw up a warning, say that there's no material in there. It does not have the ability, without the use of Bambu Labs or the Handy app, to synchronize the materials based on their RFID. So it's a very manual process that you need to set up. Make sure that you do have the correct material because the print settings are going to differ. Now, I did have a PLA CF in the AMS, and I found that it was a bit too brittle. It did have some breakage issues. And even though there is desiccant in this, the original AMS, it doesn't have a drying mechanism. And even with the desiccant in there and the things sealed, when it's connected to the Bambu Studio or the Bambu Labs slicer here, it does say that the moisture level is high, even though it hasn't been opened in days and the deskins are new in there. So keep in mind that if you are trying to run things like PLACF or the TMU for the AMS system that Bambu Labs has, which honestly, it's not a very good TPU material, just keep in mind that those probably aren't best to just sit in the AMS. But that's kind of beside the point here. All right, so now that we've got the two materials, the green and the white, there are two ways that we can do this. One is to right-click on the filament object, change filament, and then pick the one that we want. So what this is going to do is it's going to change the color, or essentially I set the filament for that second object. Now, because these are touching, they have a sort of a common wall. When we print this, as long as it's more than a couple of layers, this part is, actually, let's undo that. This part is relatively thin. I think I made that green piece 1 millimeter tall. This one's 0.8. I think it's 0.6 in the middle. Because it's only a couple layers tall, I could bend the part and separate them. But once the part gets to kind of a reasonable level, they will be bonded together. All right, so that's the first method. The second method is to actually use the paint option. Now, when we use the paint option and we've got project filaments, you'll see them listed up here. So what we can do is we can pick the filament and we can do a couple of options. We can paint. So for example, if I paint here, this is actually going to present a slight problem because it's going to try to change it's going to come around, it's going to stop and change the filament, color that area, stop, and then go back. Tons of waste, tons of time for a seemingly simple print. What I have done is I've used height ranges. So what this allows me to do is pick an entire height range. There is a potential problem with this because it doesn't actually color the entire layer. What it does is it colors, if we do like a section here, I don't know if it's going to show it, but what it actually does is it colors the number of wall traces that we have. So what this means is when we return and we slice this thing and we get down to that layer, you'll see that we've got white on the inside, white on the outside, but then still green in the middle. So this means it needs to change the material after two traces, purge it, go to a green, do those layers, purge, go back to white, and then carry on. So this can take a good bit of time. It is smart enough to do the green material first, so you can see it does kind of the infill sections, and then it switches to white, and it does all the white materials, and then it goes back. So it does have some intelligence there, but just keep in mind that when you are using this painting method, you may still see a lot of these material changes that happen between. Okay, so now that we've got two different colors assigned, again, we can do it based on the entire object, or we can do some painting. You can see the icon here for painting there. Now, how do we get this information to the printer? Well, if you are connected, all you really do is you say print plate or send, and it'll send it to the printer. The way that we need to do this if we're using the SD card method is to export basically everything that we have sliced here. Now, the way I generally do it is I go to File, Export, and export all plate sliced file. From this dropdown, you have export plate slice file and export all slice file. I'm not 100% sure that it's exactly the same because you have plate slice file and all plate slice file. So I think the all is the same, but I use this one just because that's what I use. And when we select that, what this is going to do is when you do a typical G-code export, it actually puts this into the model folder. But I've noticed that recently using this method, it's been placing it at the top level of the SD card. It still works fine for both of these, but basically what we end up with is a G-code or a .G-code .3MF file. So this is different than just a G-code file that we would get from using a single material. The 3MF basically printer setup file is what it needs to control the AMS system. Now, a couple of additional notes for you. there are some plate settings here, and there are some global settings, and we do have things like flushing volumes here, which we can tweak or modify. But what I have noticed is that not all of the available settings that we have when we have a linked AMS with the handy app or over a local area network, not all the settings are available. And what I mean by that is it's always going to go through and do the sort of auto bed level stuff. It's going to vibrate the bed and it's going to kind of work its way around. I haven't figured out a way to get around that just yet. If you do that every time, then that's not really a big deal. But if you do send it to the printer that's connected, you do have a checkbox that says to sort of do that. So I'm going to basically send this to the SD card. I'm going to walk it over to the printer, print the file, and then we're going to take a look at it. All right, so about 20 minutes later, it's probably not going to work on the webcam here, but about 20 minutes later, we've got the part. So it did exactly what it was supposed to, green and white, just like it is in on the screen, but it doesn't know that. All it knows is it's using material 1 and material 2. So this could be red and yellow, could be blue and orange. All it knows is it's taking spot 1 in the AMS and spot 2. That doesn't really matter as long as you keep up with it. Like as long as you set it up properly, it doesn't really matter what the color is, as long as the material type is right, because it's going to inherit those settings, the extruder temps and the bed temps and all that stuff. So make sure that if you are setting this up manually, that it is, you are doing that properly. Now that we've gone through the process of how to do this, how to color the different parts, either the objects or faces, how to get the file out to the printer, let's take a step back and let's talk a little bit more about why we're doing this. Well, originally with my printer, I'm going to go ahead and connect it now, but originally with my printer, or my printers, I should say, I like to keep them offline. It's just personal preference. I like to just walk an SD card over or jump drive in the case of the K1 Max. And that's kind of always how I've done it. It's not that I'm printing things that I'm worried about, but it's more of a general privacy concern. I know that with the Bambu Labs printers, there was an instance where these connected printers started randomly printing stuff in the middle of the night. And while Bambu Labs put out a statement and said that they're fixing this and most people weren't worried about it, it's those kinds of things that I like to keep stuff offline if possible. I don't like to install a lot of apps on my phone. I don't run them for 3D scanners. I don't have any games on my phone. I don't do any social media or any stuff like that. So I just generally don't like it if I have to use an app. If there is a product where I have to use a phone app, I generally won't buy it or use it. I will find something else. So just my own personal preference. It's not that I have a problem with people using these things. It's just kind of I don't want them. And so with something like the Bambu Labs, when I bought the AMS, I didn't do as much research as I should have to see if it was even possible. But when I got the AMS and I hooked it up and started to try to do it offline, I had tons of problems. Now, the problems ended up after posting on Reddit and working with Bambu Tech support, the problem ended up being the filament sensor in my extruder. Now, there wasn't a problem because I was printing stuff single spool all the time. The feeding menu inside of the printer for retracting filament never has worked right for me. And that is kind of an indicator that there was a problem, but there is no direct information or note or sensor that we can read from the display on the P1 series printers that I'm aware of. The A series and the X series both have a bit more AMS control directly on the display, but the P series doesn't seem to. And so when we have things like an AMS system that we're trying to use, or trying to use like the load and unload options in the P1S display, if that sensor has material stuck in it, we don't really have a good indicator as to if that is a problem. So initially, the AMS would not load material. It would not push material all the way to the extruder. I had to force it through a couple of different means to get that to work. And then when it would go to change materials, it would never actually feed the second material out. And so what I ended up doing is connecting it to my network. I updated the firmware on the printer, which is something I generally avoid doing. If a printer works, I don't need to change anything. I don't want science projects. I just want the thing to work. And so through all these different means, I ended up, just for troubleshooting purposes, downloading and using the handy app, and also connecting it through LAN on my desktop here. And so what we see here is the ability to do things like load and unload material into the AMS. You can't do that over the SD card method. So if you want to load a material in, for example, you will need to either have it connected through your network or use the handy app. And that gives us the ability to do things like load material. And when material is actually in the extruder, you'll see a little green dot on the extruder in both here or the handy app. That is the thing that was missing for me in understanding, why the AMS wasn't working. Had I known that I could have just taken apart that sensor, checked to make sure it was clean, and then put it back together and it would have worked fine, I probably never would have hooked it up to the network anyways. Some of the other things that you are going to be missing out on, or I haven't figured out a way to do, are things like the auto refill option. So one of the benefits of having an AMS system is if you're printing big parts and you're running to the end of a spool of material, being able to have it automatically switch to another identical spool is something that I haven't found a way to do without using, in this case, Bambu Labs or the Handy app. So that's something that you need to keep in mind. Another thing is this option to synchronize the filament list that is in the AMS, because if you're using the default or the standard Bambu materials, most of those spools have RFIDs in them. And so let's say here, if I delete these materials and delete this one here, and then I synchronize, what this is going to do is it'll pull in the material from the AMS. Now, what I've found is it's actually had a little bit of trouble with the colors. So I've got green in the first spot and I've got white in the second spot. And these are not respooled. They're directly from Bambu Labs. But what I've noticed is that it does have a little bit of trouble getting the colors right, but the material type has been okay. And I've tried both PLA Basic and the PLA CF in there. But again, these are things that you won't have available to you if you don't have the AMS linked. There are probably other things, like I said, if we were to, let's go ahead and just change this. I'll change the filament here and slice the plate. So if I say print plate with the AMS connected, you can see which filaments are here. We can do things like toggle on or off bed leveling. These are options that we don't have available. Doing the SD card shuffle, I haven't really found a way to get time lapses without using the app here. So even though there is a folder on the SD card that does say it has time lapse and video data, it always seems to be wrong or not working right. So there are some of these options that are available if you are using it connected. But hopefully this helps understand that you can use it disconnected, that you can color your parts by manually adding multiple filaments, and you can slice it and export all the plate sliced files, which will give you a G-code.3mf file, and that's what the printer really needs to see to run the AMS. Keep in mind that there are still some things that could potentially be done. So like global process presets, there are options in here to turn on time lapse, and there are other additional options for settings like the infill and support that are global that you can change. And there are some flushing volumes and purging things that you can do and tweak. What I found, at least initially, is I'm not going to be using the AMS for multicolored prints unless I absolutely have to, because it is just a waste of material. Even though it retracts everything back into the AMS, the amount of basically reflushing and then that little purge block that it ends up building on the plate over here, all of that stuff ends up just wasting material. So unless you have a good reason to do a multicolor print, I I just don't see it, I just don't see a good reason. And the main benefit for me is, again, multiples of the same material that it can switch to if you run out of material. And that's not something that I found that I can do with the AMS disconnected. It may be possible, but I haven't found a way. So hopefully this video helps. I know it's a little different than most of our videos where we talk about design and design for 3D printing or things like that. But I found this pretty difficult, and really the takeaway from it was that sensor, which was keeping me from getting the AMS to work. And I went through all these extra steps to kind of figure out that it was just that sensor, and you can use the AMS offline. Now, if you have any questions on this, please let me know. Again, I know this is a bit of a different video, but hopefully it does help people that are trying to use their AMS offline. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comments. As always, thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.